Hey, good morning. Before we actually get started into today's message and stuff, let me just remind you updates on some Wednesday night stuff. For the children and teens, some changes will be this year. Is junior and senior high will be completely separated this year in their youth programs. So we're thinking this will all work out. Stephen came up with the design for this thing, and we're hoping it all match. At Brahms, when we were using our leftover food, that's how God gave us and inspired us to come up with this new way to keep the junior high and senior high totally separated. On the adult side, we have two classes going. One of them is going to be led by Jim Steele. So Jim, where are you? And I know you were in here. Jim back there. He's going to be leading one of the adult classes, and we're going to be using right now media. And what we'll be doing is watching some video with that and then having some discussion time. On the other end of it, Karen McBay, where are you, Karen? Karen, she's handing bulletins out this morning. Karen's going to lead a women's group on Wednesday night as well, which is the same material they'll be covering on Wednesday morning. So those of you that work that would like to come out and be part of that women's Bible study, she'll be leading that in the evening, so you can be part of that class. So those are the kind of two adult options you will have. At the same time with dinner, this is very important. We need you to sign up at least for the first 4 to 5 weeks here. If you're planning on coming to eat for dinner, sign up sheets right out there. If you're new here and your name's not on there, go to the last page and it just has open slots right on there, fill it out. Just so we can make sure we have enough food. We don't want to not have enough and have people show up and have like 10 people not get food. So we need everybody to sign up that's planning on coming out on Wednesday nights on that sheet. And if you're going, I'm not really sure, sign up just so we can make sure we have enough food to start with, all right? And then by about 6 weeks into it, we get a pretty regular pattern of who's here, and we can get the food set up in a correct order that way. All right? So everybody's going to sign up, right? That's coming Wednesday? Okay, all right. With that, today we are finishing up our summer series where we've been walking through this book of Philippians, or this letter of Philippians that Paul wrote to the people and the Christians at the church in Philippi. And what we're going to be looking at today is he's going to be looking at contentment. But before we get into that and how to be successful in our spiritual lives, before we get into that, how many of you have watched some of the Olympics over the last 2 weeks? Have taken some time? Okay, so that's about 80% of you. I love the Olympics, and all honesty, every 4 years I love watching them. Well, now it's every 2 because they split like the winter and the summer. But I love watching them. But the thing I love most watching them is the interviews they do with the people that win gold medals after they win them. Does anyone else love watching those? The reason I love those is in those minutes and in those moments, you see people are just completely satisfied. You see with people with complete joy, they're totally content in that moment. Some of them we've seen this year is the Final Five. How many of you watched these girls win? They were amazing. I think I heard the one stat, they said if you take every difference between the gold and silver medal teams since 1967 until 2016 and added up the differences between all of them, our girls, these 5 here, won this year by that combined score plus about like 0.8 of a point. They just killed them. They won by like 8.5 points or something, which is unheard of. It's never been done. They were just amazing. But in their interviews, they're just full of joy. They're just bubbly. They're enjoying. They have their gold medals and they're holding on to them. They're just fun to watch. Michael Phelps, how many of you watched him win? Okay, Michael Phelps, love him or hate him. He is from the University of Michigan, so you should love him because it's the best school in all the country. But Michael Phelps this year was the best parts I loved is he won 2 races this year where he lost them in 2012 in London, and he won them this year. And you could just see the satisfaction in him. And one of them was this one, if you saw this, where he got up on the ropes afterwards, and he was just like, now you might call that arrogance. It might be. But the dude's won like 23 gold medals, all right? But you could tell he was totally satisfied in that moment, like, I got back what I lost 4 years ago. It was an amazing moment. Katie Ledecky, was it Katie Ledecky? Did you see her? She's our new female swimmer, kills everybody. I mean, she was just wiping people out by like 8-9 seconds, or she would get done, get out of the pool, and she'd just be sitting down there, and people are still swimming to come to the end. Just amazing. But every time you saw her win one of her gold medals, just seeing her interviews, she's just like all giggly and just like full of joy. Incredible to watch. Simone Biles, one of our gymnasts, I think she won 4 the team gold and then 3 individual golds, and then 1 silver or bronze or something. She's the one that's different. She like doesn't show any emotion, like very little emotion. But you can tell just looking at her that she just has pride. Like, I just won this gold medal. I did what I came here to do. And you can just see it in her eyes that she just has pride. An amazing gymnast, right? One of the greatest they've ever seen, they say. Last one is, most of you probably didn't know this, our women's rowing team. How many of you knew they won a gold? Okay, see, only a few of us. They actually won a gold medal as our rowing team. That's where they all send those skinny little boats and they all row together. They won a gold, and watching their interview is amazing. They're just all giggly. They're doing all their thing. What I love about it, though, is this, is you do see this pure sense of joy, pure sense of satisfaction. You can tell because they've completed their goal they've been working on for 4 years and winning their goal, they are just totally at that moment when they're being interviewed content. Like everything came together for them. And I love seeing that. And the difference is this. We sit on the other side of them on the TVs, and we watch them, and we look at them, and we go, they're different. They're extraordinary people. They're not like us. They're extraordinary. And the thing about them is this. They are special athletes. There's no doubt about it. The stuff some of these athletes can do are things we can never do. We couldn't dream of doing. It is a gift from God, some of the things they can do athletically. But I do want you to know this. The joy, the satisfaction, the contentment that you see them experience when they've won their gold medals, there is nothing extraordinary about that. And there's nothing in that moment that makes it special that you can't experience the same feelings and the same joy, the same satisfaction, the same contentment. You can experience the same things they did because it simply comes from this. It comes from having a goal, working at it, and achieving it. And when you achieve that goal that you've worked really hard for, you experience a joy, a satisfaction, a contentment of going, I achieved this goal that I had set before me. And you can have the same expressions you see when they're interviewing these kids with their gold medals. You can experience the same thing. It's not an extraordinary event. It's just something a lot of us don't get to be successful at a lot of times in our lives, so we don't experience it too much. What Paul does, Paul often compares us to Olympic athletes. One of the things that we can connect directly back to the Bible. In Paul's time, because the Olympics started in Rome, they actually had the Olympics. So they saw it. Wasn't exactly like ours, but this is where ours come from. And he compares us to the athletes. Here's what he says in 1 Corinthians 9. He says this, all athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away. We do it for an eternal prize, for something eternal. You see, we have a goal. We have a mission that's been set before us. In 2 Corinthians 5, Paul says it like this. He says, we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We have a goal. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ in here, your goal is you are to be an ambassador for Jesus Christ to the world around you. That is your goal. That is what you are to strive for. That is what you are looking to accomplish in your life, is to be an ambassador for God with the world around you. But here's the honest truth. Most of the time, we fail at accomplishing that. Most of the time, we are not successful at that. And the reason for that is this, selfishness. And the core root of our selfishness always stems from the fact that we're not actually content with our lives. And when we're not content with our lives, what happens is we become very self-focused and focus on our lives, and we go, God's stuff can wait till I achieve the stuff I want to achieve. And then after I achieve what I want to achieve, then I'll get to God's things. And most of us sitting here this morning, I would even beg to say this, all of us have had those thoughts in our minds, have we not? I'm going to do what I want to get done first, and someday I'll get to God's stuff. And it's because we're not content where we are in life right now, and so it leads us to focus on ourselves more than it does to focus on God's work and God's goals for our lives. And that selfishness destroys our ability to experience that joy, satisfaction, and contentment we see on TV for the last 2 weeks of our lives and in our own lives walking with Christ. So what we're going to see this morning is this. Paul's going to teach us how to be content, or better yet, Paul's going to show us how he found a way to be content, and also how he found a way to be wildly successful in accomplishing the goals that God set before him. Of anyone outside of Jesus Christ, Paul's probably the most successful guy at attaining the goals that God set before him. And he's going to explain how he did that in the last part of Philippians. So here's the first thing we're going to see this morning. First, he's going to give us a secret to contentment. What is the secret to finding contentment in your life, of being content? Here's what he says in verse 11 of chapter 4 of the book of Philippians. He says, "For I have learned how to be content with whatever I have." So he makes a statement. I, Paul, I've learned how to be content with whatever I have. Okay? Now, the benefit we have is we just don't have that letter. We have other letters he wrote, and we also have other letters from other New Testament authors. And by looking at those letters, we can figure out what it is that made him content, how he found that contentment. Here's what we see in the scriptures. 1 Timothy 6 and 7, he says this. He says, yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. He says, after all, we brought nothing with us when we came into this world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. Okay, one of the secrets of Paul's ability to be content in life is this. He simply realized the fact of life. You brought nothing when you came into this world. You were just born. You brought nothing. And when you leave it, nothing goes with you. Okay? I've been in funerals and seen people buried and stuff, and they bury stuff in their caskets and all, and you're kind of going, that's all nice, and yeah, I get the memory thing and the symbolic thing, but it isn't going with them where they're going. Okay? They're not here anymore. They're not in this place anymore. That stuff doesn't go with them. And Paul realized that and went, I brought nothing into this world. I'm not going to take anything out of it. So why am I spending all my time working for it when I can't do anything with it? Okay, the Apostle Peter, in his writings, you see this comment. He says this, dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from the worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. The Apostle Peter realized, this isn't my home. Our houses, our cars, our stuff, our money, our accomplishments, our titles, our trophies, he realized that is not what we're living for, that is not the world we are to be striving for. That is what foreigners, what other people are striving for. That is not what I'm striving for. I'm different. I'm an outsider because I'm a follower of Christ. And this world is not my home, and I'm not trying to build my life for this world. Between those two passages, what you get is you get a sense of what brought contentment to Paul, and it was this. He understood, and he also accepted. It wasn't just I know, it was I know and I believe it. And what he believed is this, is that this place is not what he was meant for. This temporal world around you is not what you were designed and meant for. You were meant to live in God's presence in his eternal kingdom forever. And this is just a temporary place that we are passing through. And when Paul learned that, he was able to be content in any situation he found himself in. He just went, I found the secret to being content with whatever I have. Okay? If you don't ever learn that same lesson, here's what you will find. You will never be content in life. You will always be wanting more, or you'll always be wanting something different. You will never find a place of contentment. And when you don't find a place of contentment, you never fulfill God's goals for your life because you're always chasing things for you rather than chasing things for God. Why was Paul so successful? Paul was so successful because he learned to be content so he could focus on the kingdom of God. And he could strive after those things and he could achieve those things for God's victory, not his. Because he didn't care about this earth. He didn't care about his time here other than doing the things God laid before him to do eternal work. That was his secret to contentment. The second thing Paul brings up is the two big traps, okay? These are the two big traps that will steal your ability to find contentment. There's other ones, but he's very specific on what these are. Here's what he says in verse 12. He says, I know how to live on almost nothing or on everything. I've learned the secret to living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or an empty, with plenty or with little. All right? Paul lays out two big traps here that will prevent you from finding contentment, and they are simply this: not having what you want and then having everything you want. Those are the two big traps. Let me explain how they play out in your life. When you don't have the stuff you want, it makes you extremely selfish and self-focused. Because what you do is because you look at yourself and go, I don't have what I want. I need to attain those things, as I said before. I need to attain those things. I need to get comfortable and have those things in my life. Then God comes. Then God comes. When I get what I want, because I don't have what I want, then when I achieve that, God comes. And then I do his work. Let me ask you this question. How many of you have ever gotten to the point where you don't want anything else? Okay, we're Americans. We live in a consumer society. We're forced constantly to want new stuff, to want more stuff, to have better stuff. That's what the entire world pushes on us, is what you have is not good enough, you can get something new. If all we do is focus on that and always go, I don't have what I need and what I want, it's hard to ever get to God's work. Because you will spend your whole life doing the work of this earth, preparing to get stuff here that can't go with you when you die, and you will never accomplish the things that God puts before you because you're so self-focused on the things in your life for this world. And that's the big number one trap. The second one is this, having everything you want. You can go the other extreme, which is you have everything you want, and what this does to you is this. It makes you apathetic. And it makes you lose your urgency to do the work of God because you go, I'm kind of just comfortable, fairly satisfied. I don't have a whole lot of wants. And you get lazy and you get apathetic in your walk with Christ. That's the other one. What is unique about Paul is this. Paul lived both lives, but he never fell into the temptation that we fall into. All right, let me show you two passages. One passage comes from Philippians chapter 3. This is where Paul describes the point in his life where he has everything. This is everything he ever wanted. It says this. He says, I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. Real quick, I'm going to read to you that he was a Jew back in ancient times. The things he's going to line out here, all the things he throws out are highly prestigious things to have if you were a Jew back then. And he says this, I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I was a pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demanded the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church. And as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without a fault. What I can tell you is this. Paul, at this point in his life, had everything. A guy that had this reputation with this bloodline and the areas that we know he was already in his training means he didn't have needs. He was taken care of very well. He was a wealthy man within a wealthy group of people that was taken care of by other people. Paul had every need met that you could ever imagine. He was doing well. But then he wraps it up like this. He says, I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless, or in some translations, I consider them garbage, is how it's said, because of what Christ has done. Paul, after coming to know Christ, looks back at that stage in his life where he had everything, and he goes, I have no desire for it anymore. I have no desire to get back to that because that's not what I'm living for. I'm living for Christ. And that stuff has no desires in my life anymore. I consider it garbage and worthless time that I wasted my time when I could have been doing Christ work. Okay? He doesn't fall into the temptation because he realizes his work isn't the work of this world. Now, to the other side of things, in 2 Corinthians 6, we see him writing this, and he writes several different times. This is one of the passage where he writes about how he has nothing. And he says this. He says, we are ignored even though we are well known. So he's going, people ignore me, but everybody knows who I am. They know who I am. It's not because they don't know who I am. They know who I am, but they choose to ignore me. He says, we live close to death, but we are still alive. We have been beaten, but we have not been killed. Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. We own nothing, yet we have everything. You get Paul who goes, in this stage of my life, I have nothing. I'm poor, I'm forgotten, I'm beaten. People make fun of me, I'm a nobody. But at this point, I have everything. Why? Because whether he was rich or whether he was poor, whether he had everything he wanted or not anything that he wanted, his focus was the kingdom of God, and that's the only thing he pursued. And through that, he always felt like I have everything. Because he had joy, he had satisfaction, he had contentment. He had things that can only come through serving Christ and working towards that goal in your life. That's what Paul realized. The final thing he brings up in this passage is this. He reveals to us his mindset that led him to have success in the kingdom of God. Now, if you don't know Paul's history real quick, Paul is the anti-Christian. He's a Jew, and he actually tries to destroy the church back before Christ has an interaction with him. And he hunts down Christians. From the best we can tell, probably had blood on his hands from murdering some Christians, and he tries to destroy the church. And he's the guy one day where Jesus shows up to him and has a one-on-one conversation with him and basically says, Paul, I'm going to use you to take this message not to the Jews but to the Gentiles, to everybody else on this earth outside the Jews. You're going to go to the Gentiles and you're going to start churches and you're going to proclaim my message of grace and hope and forgiveness to the rest of the world. And from that point, Paul's life totally shifts. He has two different lives and he shifts to this new Paul. And he, at this point, has to figure out, what am I going to do? And God puts very specific goals before him. And if you know his history, the guy starts endless numbers of churches. He writes probably about 55% of the New Testament in his writings. One of the most godly, loyal men who went through the toughest struggles and stayed faithful that we know of. Wildly successful, not perfect, wildly successful for the goals that God put before him in the kingdom of God. So what he does here is he's going to reveal to you his mindset of how he achieved those things. And here's what he says in verse 13. You've heard this one if you've been around church before. He says this, for I can do everything through who? I can do everything through who gives me strength. He says, I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Paul understood that his ability to accomplish God's goals for his life weren't dependent on his abilities, but on the power that God had provided him. He understood it's not my limits that limit me. God's given me the power to achieve any goal he puts before me. And Paul was able to live with that and understand that and believe it and walk that out every day of his life. What we need to understand is this. Our number one barrier to being the person God has called us to be in this world is ourselves. It's ourselves. We have to stop making excuses for why we are not accomplishing God's goals in our lives. Okay, here's some of the excuses maybe you've made. Maybe it's been this one. When I have more money, I'll do what God has called me to do. How many of you have made that excuse? I've been there a lot of times. How many of you went and bought lottery tickets and went, if I can win this lottery, I can do so much more work for God? How many of you done that? Admit it. I've done it. I'm your minister. I've done it before. If I could win the $520 million, think of all the stuff I could do in East Tulsa for the glory of God. And you go out and go, and then you go, but since I don't have that, I don't need to do it. Because it's only if I get that money can I do that stuff. Okay? We use that as an excuse. We use that as a crutch to justify why we don't do what God calls us to do. Maybe you've done this one. When I have more time, then I'll get to God stuff. I've got kids right now. I've got my spouse. I've got all this going on, my work. And someday when everything lets up and I have more time, then I'm going to get focused. I'm really going to do God's work that I know he's been calling me to do for the last 20 years. How well does that work for anybody? Okay? None of us ever end up with a whole lot of free time. It's one thing I've noticed is even the retirees, they like retire and you're like, so you got a lot of free time? Well, outside of Rick. No, man, I'm just really busy. I had to throw Rick under the bus there. But here's the thing. We are always busy because the minute you retire, you've got grandkids. You've got other things you got going on. You stay busy, and it never gets to that point where you go, man, I have enough time now that I can do God's work. Because really what it is, it's a heart issue. And you're striving for the wrong things, and you use the time issue as an escape, as an excuse, as a crutch to go, this is why I'm not doing what God's called me to do. Maybe you've used this one. When I have more abilities. So when I grow up in my faith a little bit more, I have more abilities or more skills, then I can do the work of God. And this is an excuse that we use. Maybe this is yours. When I feel better, I just haven't been feeling real well. I've been really tired. I feel sick. I'm just kind of weak. I don't feel real good, so I can't do God's work. And until I get feeling better someday, then I'll start doing God's work, and then I'll get focused on his stuff. Maybe it's this one. When I have better opportunities. Man, right now the opportunities just aren't really good, and God's just going to open this miracle thing, and it's going to make it real easy for me to do. Then I'll do God's work. When it becomes easy and the opportunities are better. Let me just tell you something. When you do God's work, rarely is it real easy. Because if it was real easy, you wouldn't have a lot of joy, satisfaction, and contentment after you achieved it, because it would be on your power doing it, not his. And what makes it wonderful is when you know God empowered you through that to accomplish his work, That's when you experience joy because you realize the hand of God was on your life. Okay? Those are excuses we make. Our barriers in accomplishing God's goals for our lives rarely come from outside sources. Rarely does it come from outside sources. They almost always come from us finding excuses to justify why we aren't being successful in God's kingdom work in our lives. Our number one barrier we have to get past is ourselves. Here's what Paul writes in Romans 12. He says this, never be what? Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Never be apathetic. Never make excuses. Never put it off. Work hard and enthusiastically for the Lord. That's what he would tell you to do. To wrap up this letter of Philippians, followers of Jesus Christ, if that's what you consider yourself, you are a follower of Jesus Christ. God has called you to a great task. You are to be his ambassador to the world around you. Okay? That means where you work, you are to be an ambassador for Christ in that environment. I don't care what the job is, you have an opportunity to represent and be an ambassador for his love and forgiveness and hope that you can find a purpose in Christ. You are to be his ambassador. When you are at home with your family, if it's just you and your spouse, or you and your significant one, or you and your children, you have a responsibility as a follower of Christ to be an ambassador for Christ in that situation. All right? When you are out at the grocery store and you're getting groceries, you have an obligation. You have been called by God. You have a task to be an ambassador for Jesus Christ in that scenario. And a lot of times they sit there and go, I'm just going to the grocery store and getting food. But people see you. You run into people. You go through cashiers. You bump into people. You ask people questions. The way you handle yourself. You are to be an ambassador for Jesus Christ. We have been given a great goal that we are called to as followers of Jesus Christ. Through focusing on that goal, through achieving that goal, what you will see is this in your life. You will experience joy, satisfaction, and contentment that we get glimpses of when we see those people holding their gold medals on TV for the last 2 weeks. That can be in your life. But the difference between those is this. They do it for a medal that will fade away. We do it for medals that will last for eternity. That's the big difference. So our time of joy and all doesn't last for a brief second. It can last for a lifetime. It can last for eternity because we're achieving the goals God has put before us. Run the race well, Christians. This is not your home. This is not what you're meant to live for. Remember, you are not limited by your limits, but you have been empowered by the creator of the universe to carry out his work in your time that you have on this planet right here. So represent Jesus well every place you go. Honor him in all the things you do and follow God's Spirit's lead no matter what obstacles are put in your path. And when you do, you will carry out what Paul has talked about all through Philippians. You will carry out the mission that God has put before you, and you will experience a peace, a joy, a satisfaction that can't be earned anywhere else in this world except through a relationship with Jesus Christ and doing his work for his kingdom. Would you pray with me?